welcome everyone to the Innovation Alley podcast. Your hosts today, Chris Johnson and Michael Gary, and we are interviewing our co-host Kerry Stevenson, who is going to talk to us today about 3D printing. I just went to the CES show. Again, you're of course the editor and founder of Fabbaloo. So when it comes to all things 3D printing, you are a recognized world-leading expert. So we thought we'd save some money on the podcast bribes and talk to one of our own this week. But to kick things off, really, what are some of the 2016 trends we're going to see when it comes to 3D printing?
Well, there's been some interesting developments, and the big one is that a couple of years ago there was this big thought that, hey, consumer 3D printing, everybody should have a machine in their home, have them in your kitchen, have them in the kids' bedroom, we'd be printing out plastic dragons all day long. And turns out that the machines are just a little bit too hard for most people, and so as a result, only the DIY kind of people bought them.
And is it they don't work? They break easily?
They break, but it requires lots of manual fussing, and it's just a little bit too more complicated than most people would.
A little too dot matrix, not enough cannon out of the box.
That's it. So what happened is particularly the larger companies ran out of customers. And so what a lot of the companies are now doing is they're not really announcing new hardware. What instead they're doing is they're working with application and usage. So they'll say, well, we're going to focus on the education market. And so then they're working on features that would help the educators do their job with the 3D printers, thus generating more customers, right? And so you'll see that in several areas. We actually saw that with manufacturing as well. For example, 3D Systems had this new system where they had a robot arm holding the build plate. So basically, the 3D print appears on the end of the arm, and then the robot arm can take that print and put it on the next step of the assembly line. This is a huge thing because previously the machines were standalone, and you'd have to have an operator pull it out. And what does the operator do? Well, he puts it in the next stage of the assembly line, whatever that is. Anyway, so they figured out a way to do this, and if you can imagine, like 30 of these things at once, like every minute there's a piece coming off and you have an assembly line with integrated 3D printing. So that's what they've done. They've examined the workflow for manufacturing in that case and figured out a way to make it better.
So buzz to business. It's actually focusing on application, for better or worse.
Right, and a lot of it's on education. So another trend is metal 3D printing. And this is a very tricky business. I don't know if you know this, but finely powdered metal can get airborne, and many metals are actually toxic. And some are even explosive. And so when you want to print with these powders, because what they do is they shine like a super powerful laser that melts the powder.
Yeah, the sinters.
Yeah, exactly. So they have to put it in like a vacuum chamber that has no oxygen in it. So they got like argon or vacuum, and the machines that do this are stupendously large and expensive. And so it hasn't really been that popular. But what's happened in the past year or two is that certain industries have discovered that they could actually make hay with this stuff, particularly the aerospace industry. So they previously, if they had some complicated component of their aircraft, to make that with the usual smelting methods, they would have to chop it up into like 17 different pieces and then bolt them together. Yeah. But on an airframe, well, you have to account for the weight of all those bolts and the possibility that there might be a failure on one of the seams. But now with the 3D printing, you could print like the whole piece in one print, seamless with no bolts, and so it's lighter and it's stronger, and they can do exactly what they want. And they can still pay for it because aerospace parts are always expensive anyway. So that industry, medical, and a couple other industries can actually make really good use of this metal stuff. And so with the crash in the consumer angle, a lot of the vendors are saying, hey, let's go full bore on this metal stuff.
So are we going to see less like cupcake printing machines and like,
I'm still waiting for my pancake bot. Come on now.
Yeah. But no, seriously, over the last year, when you look back at 2015, it was 3D print X, 3D print Y, 3D print Z, right? Like it was different materials seemed to be the big surge.
Fluffy Bunny out of ABS, Fluffy Bunny out of
Is that
PLA.
still happening
Fluffy
in-
Bunny
Yeah,
out of-
there's a bunch of guys that are making all kinds of crazy filaments. Like I got a sample of filament made from algae, so it's this sort of dull green color. And basically, all they're doing is taking regular PLA plastic and mixing in some dry whatever. And there's another outfit that makes coffee filaments or wood filament. Like the coffee, I actually saw. I have a picture of this. It's a small 3D printed coffee table made out of coffee.
Is it drinkable? Like, or is it all full of glue?
No, it's plastic mixed with.
It's a gimmick.
It's a
Right.
gimmick. That's
Right.
all it is. So that's just noise. It's not important. What is important though is people are figuring out ways to make these things more useful. I'll give you another example. AIO Robotics. They have otherwise a nondescript machine, but they've put some smarts in it so it can run apps. So one of the apps they've got is the robotics lab. So you call this thing up if you're a school, and it has robot projects. So you can pick one of several different projects. It has all of the 3D files to make it. It has the instructions for how to print it, has the instructions for how to assemble it, and it has the instructions for what to do with the thing once you've built it. So you have an entire curriculum, and it's on the machine. You buy the machine, and it's already there. You don't need to download anything or connect to anything. But if you do
incredible.
connect, they can all update it and add more through the cloud. The same machine has a prosthetic hand application. So you can actually just pick the size of the prosthetic hand you want and just push the button and it prints it all out for you. This is built on the machine.
So that seems like a very, very first step in the Star Trek replicator kind of concept,
Yep.
where I can actually ask this thing to produce things that are useful to me on a daily basis. But from this educational perspective to maybe buying something in my own, buying a printer for my own home, where I'd have applications where I could. I broke my dryer this morning. I could print out my dryer element. Are we decades away from that? 5 years? Like, what in your mind? Where
the
do you see it?
technology exists today to do that, and I have actually done that. I have made a new knob for my slow cooker on the thing, but the catch was like you have to have a 3D model to print. It's kind of like having a paper printer, and somebody says, "Hey, quick, print a novel." Well, you kind of have to write the novel. Same thing here. You have to create the 3D model, or you have to get it from somewhere. Now, the slow cooker company somewhere has the 3D model file buried in their archives, and they're just not selling it to you. So the issue is not the technology; it's the intellectual property. Like, how can they deliver you that file?
Right.
And I think there's some work.
I'm sure they looked at the recording industry and said, sharing our stuff openly via the internet, maybe not such a hot idea.
Well, I did talk to one company called Source 3, and their purpose, and I should say that some people are kind of giving up on making printers, so they're making like services that help printers. So one of them is Source 3, and they're into licensing. So they basically give you a dashboard, and if you have some kind of a model, you can automatically deploy it to all these different print services in a controlled manner. So the slow cooker company could, if they wanted and signed up, have all of their different knobs ready for printing on these services, and even stream to your home printer too.
So one day I'll have a Spotify kind of service with all my 3D stuff in it, and just press play to print.
Yep, and you probably have to pay like some small amount to get the file, but it's probably cheaper than going to Home Depot and buying one for $39.
Yeah, and $40 of gas in my truck.
Yeah.
Right.
So switching gears, Kerry.
Yeah.
You're at CES last couple of weeks in Vegas. You're walking around and you're a guy who gets the inside scoop on 3D printing, and you're walking around meeting all these booths.
Yeah.
There had to be outside of the
who are we
big
investing
guys.
in?
Yeah. Who's on the horizon? Like, was there anybody who just like
the
knocked
wow?
your socks off that you just thought was a cool story? They're at a cool point or something like that.
There was huge booths with these multi-million-dollar companies, and there was some small booths, and there was people with 7 people in the company. And I met with one guy. His R&D department was 335 people. There's all different sizes. But one that was particularly interesting was down in the startup ghetto. He had this tiny little booth, and it was this couple from Australia. There's just 2 of them in this company. In fact, he still had a day job, and he had taken a personal loan to come all the way to CES to show off his machine. And he had this really simple design for an advanced printer. It had almost no moving parts in it, and it could do something that virtually no other printer can do, which is print continuously. Like normally, when you're printing discrete layers, and depending on the size of the layers, you can actually see them and feel them, and they look rough. This guy was printing continuously, and so the objects that were coming out were like perfectly smooth, and no one else does that. But the poor guy, it was just himself. I said, "Who's investing in you?" And he said, "Well, we haven't got any yet." And who's mentoring you? And he said, "Well, nobody." And I said, "Well, why don't you just go to your local startup community in Brisbane and get one?"
Yeah.
And they don't have that.
Uh-oh.
And I thought about our community here. It's like like we do those things, but be thankful because not everyone else has those. So anyway, I felt really bad for these guys because they had such a really good product, but they just didn't have the legs to do it, and they were trying as hard as they could. Good people. Anyway, later on in the show, I ran into my buddy, who he's working elsewhere now, but he used to be the business development manager for MakerBot, and he was one of the guys that helped get them into the multi-tens of $1 million range. And he said, "Have you seen anything interesting at the show?" And I said, "Yeah, I have. Come with me." So I took him down there, and I introduced him to the couple, and she gave me a big hug and was almost crying.
Like you probably put them on a new path. It's just like what happens every day in this startup community, which we now take for granted.
Yep.
That wasn't here 4 or 5 years ago. You just made a microcosm of that happen there.
Yep.
And so what that says from an optimism standpoint is, as a startup, you can go to a place like CES. You can get some notice, and sometimes all it takes is a couple.
Here's the thing: like I'd only heard about these guys because they had some viral video years ago or a few months ago. And that's why I looked them up. They'd never seen me before. I don't know anything about them, but I want this stuff to succeed, so I did what I could. I hooked them up, and they were talking, and the Australian guy had started asking all these questions, and my MakerBot buddy said, "Oh, hold on, we're going to talk about that and 100 other things. Just cool it."
So we're just starting to wrap things up. I think one of the challenges as a startup, as someone who wants to get invested into using these technologies for prototyping, and then in my other lives, heavy industry wants to invest metal printers, but the thing everyone has fear around is that the industry's too new. If let's just focus on the startups. If I wanted to buy a printer, what should I be thinking about before going out and spending 3, 5, 10? You wouldn't.
No, I think I would buy a designer first. Okay, so you have to make the design as we talked about earlier. Yeah. There's lots of different 3D print services that you can use, and I think you'd want to start with those until you kind of understand what's going on, and then when you have enough volume of iterations, then consider buying something.
So volume of iterations. So I'm doing enough kinds of prototypes on a regular basis.
Right. Exactly. Okay. If you have a product and you need a prototype for it, or 2 or 3, it's probably not worth buying a printer. Just go get it from a service. They'll send it to you in the mail.
Yeah. And if you're lucky enough to be in Winnipeg, you can stroll into a Scentworks where there's 7 or 8 of them sitting there for you.
Yep.
So how about heavy industry? So I am an aerospace manufacturer or small consultancy of a couple dozen folks, and I want to get into 3D printing parts, metal printers. I got $1 million to spend. Same advice. Should I buy a printer? Should
I think the first thing they should do is give me a $500,000 consulting contract, and I will help them figure that out.
Fabbaloo.com.
Yeah. But no, they should get some staff that have some experience in this space, and then they can lead the charge from there. Again, I think they should still start with print services. There are ones that do metal 3D printing, and it's just more expensive. But again, learn what you're doing before you start sinking money into these machines, because the machines, they're still changing very, very fast. There's new machines every few months, and the problem is if you're spending like $800,000, which is the cost of 3D Systems' new metal printer, prints in titanium, you're going to have to amortize that over X number of years. And that thing might be out of date.
Well, it sounds like X number of months.
Yeah. So, you really have to have a big volume to do that. Yeah. So I would lean heavily on the print services until you get there.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I know that we could go on for hours. I know, and I think we'll be doing a follow-up session because 3D printing, like VR, these things, these are the big topics for 2016. Yeah. I know from a start perspective, we'll get some other folks involved with 3D printing questions in the future. So thank you very much for your time as always.
Thanks.
And we'll wrap things up for now. Thank you.